Pork stir-fried noodles, or lo mein, is an ideal marriage of tender, chewy Chinese wheat noodles, crisp, tender vegetables, and char siu, smoky barbecued pork. Each component is essential to the dish. The problem? Getting your hands on char siu if you don't live near a Chinatown. But don't worry, we've come up with a sweet and savory solution that won't take hours to prepare. By the way, this lesson is from our Chinese noodles class, out now on ATK classes on the America's Test Kitchen app. In this class, we'll explain the common types of Chinese noodles, how to shop for them and how to use them, as well as how to cook them to the correct texture. We'll also talk about popular sauces you can make and different meats you can source to pair with your noodles. You'll learn about wok hei and the advantages of using a wok, as well as how to stir-fry successfully in a skillet. Learn at your own pace and have fun while you do it. But first, let's make pork lo mein. Here I have boneless country-style pork ribs, about 1 pound. I've set them in the freezer for about 15 minutes. This firms up the flesh slightly so that I can slice them really nice and thin. I've also trimmed off all of the fat on the ribs. So I'm just going to start by cutting these pork ribs crosswise. This cuts up any long fibers in the meat and makes it really tender rather than chewy. I like to start by just cutting my long piece in half just to make it a little bit easier to get my knife into it. And then again, cutting across the grain. I'm just cutting on a bias here. You'll notice that there's some great fat marbling running across the pork. This is why we like country style ribs for this purpose. Typically, char siu is made with pork shoulder, which has great fat content, but takes a long time to cook and break down and become really melt in your mouth tender. So we're looking for a really easy, quick facsimile to what pork shoulder might be used for here. So I'm slicing my pork about 1/8 inch thick. I'm just going to finish slicing all of my pork so that I can give my hands a wash and then start on the marinade. Again, we're trying to create a quick replica of char siu, also pronounced cha shao in Mandarin, which has these sticky, sweet, savory flavors. But again, it takes a long time to infuse that into the pork. So instead, we're using some really powerful marinade ingredients to quickly infuse that into our country style ribs. So I'm going to start with some soy sauce. Here I have 3 tablespoons, and I'm just adding this to a bowl, which is where I'm going to build my marinade. Next, I have 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce, as well as 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce. Here I have a tablespoon of toasted sesame oil. This just adds a nice floral nuttiness and also a glossy sheen that will separate the pork pieces and coat each piece. And here I have a 1/4 teaspoon of liquid smoke. You only need a little bit to add a lot of flavor. This just replicates some of that smoky, charred flavor we get from roasting a piece of char siu all day. And finally, I have a 1/4 teaspoon of 5-spice powder. 5-spice is a really complex blend of classic Chinese flavors like cinnamon, fennel, star anise, cloves, and either white or Sichuan peppercorn. So it's a lot of flavor in just a tiny pinch. So adding this will give the pork a lot of depth. So now that all of my marinade ingredients are in the bowl, I'm just going to give that a quick whisk. I am just going to transfer 3 tablespoons of this marinade into my bowl. And the rest of the marinade I'm going to set aside and revisit later. I'm just stirring things so that everything is uniformly coated. Personally, I like using chopsticks to stir my proteins into marinade. It just allows me to be a little bit more nimble and flexible with picking up each piece and breaking up any clumps. And they're also really nice and delicate, so I don't tear the meat or break up any of those fibers. That's what I'll be using today, but you could also use a spatula or some tongs for this. And I'm just going to cover up my bowl. Here I just have a sheet of plastic wrap. And I'm going to set this in the fridge for about 15 minutes or up to an hour and just really let those flavors soak in. And I'm just going to prepare my vegetables in the meantime. I'm starting off with 8 ounces of fresh shiitake mushrooms. These have a lot of meaty depth, a lot of flavor, but unlike other fresh mushrooms, they tend to be a little bit tougher, so I need to do a little bit of prep work with them. I'm going to start by snapping off the stems of these mushrooms. They can be a little bit woody and not really pleasant to eat. And these guys are pretty big. We want everything to be fairly bite-sized for a stir fry since it happens so quickly. So I'm just going to quarter these into bite-sized pieces. Next, I'm going to move on to my scallions. I have 10 individual scallions. In Chinese cooking, we like using the entire scallion, so whites and greens, but they have different flavors, so we want to prepare them differently. So I'm going to start by cutting off the root ends of the scallions, just to clean them up a bit. I'm going to separate out my dark green and my white section of the scallion. I'm including this sort of light green area since it also packs a lot of flavor and I want to treat it like the whites. The greens I'm just going to cut into 1-inch segments. They're a little more tender and delicate, so I don't want to cut them too fine. I want them to remain intact and rather tender crisp. I'm just going to use my bench scraper to transfer them to the bowl. Scallion whites are a little bit hardier, so I want to slice them thin just so they really melt into the noodles and coat them with that flavor. Now, I slice my scallions a particular way. You might think there's just one way to slice scallions, which typically would be, a forward cut like this, which works just fine. I have a little trick for you. I actually like cutting my scallions with a backward pull on my knife. I find this is just a little bit gentler on the scallions. You don't hear that crunch, which means that the cell walls are breaking and you're kind of bruising the scallions and losing a lot of flavor. You'll notice I'm cutting the scallions straight on. In Chinese cooking, we often like using small rings of scallions so that they incorporate into the dish rather than cutting them on the bias. And if you're feeling a little more confident with your knife stroke, you can use a couple scallions at a time just to speed things along. Great, so now I'm going to transfer them into the same bowl as my greens. They cook at the same time, so it's no problem mixing them up. I love using a bench scraper while cooking. It just really helps me pick up small, delicate items like these scallions and clean up my station nicely. Last but not least, let's prep our Napa cabbage. Napa can really vary in size, can be really big, so I'm using half of a small head here today just so it doesn't overwhelm the dish. You can also use Chinese cabbage here, but today I prefer Napa. It has this really nice contrast of these frilly leaves and these juicy stems, so it's going to add a lot of freshness and bulk to the dish. So to prepare my cabbage, I'm just going to lay it on flat on its side, cut it lengthwise across in half, just to make it a little easier to work with and have some smaller slices. And now that that's cut into 2 wedges, I'm just going to remove the core. This part's rather tough, so we don't want that in our stir fry. And just cutting these about a 1/2 inch thick. I don't want these pieces to be too small or large, just so that they don't wilt too quickly with the noodles, but still get tender. And using my trusty bench scraper, just transferring that to a bowl. So now I'm going to build the sauce, and if you remember, we reserved some of the marinade from before, and this is going to just act as a base or a concentrate for the sauce that I'm just going to bulk up with a little bit of liquid and thickener. So I'm just going to add 1/2 cup of chicken broth. This just adds a little bit of volume to everything without diluting it like water might, so it's still plenty flavorful. Just going to whisk that in. And I'm also adding a tablespoon of chili garlic sauce. This is just going to add a little bit of subtle kick and some sweetness. And I'm also adding a teaspoon of cornstarch. I want to whisk this in while the liquid is still cold just to prevent any clumps. So now all of our ingredients are prepped, our sauce is ready, and it's time to get cooking. So it's been just over 15 minutes and my pork is nice and flavorful. It's absorbed all of those marinade flavors. I love how short of a time it takes. You actually don't want to let it go overnight or for too long, otherwise it might become too salty. Today I'll be using a 14-inch flat bottom wok. This is made of carbon steel, so it has great heat retention. I can really heat it up on high and flash sear things. It also has these really beautiful sloped sides that can hold a lot of noodles and really allow me to toss things and use all sides of the wok. If you don't have access to a wok, you can also use a large non-stick carbon steel or cast iron skillet, anything with a lot of surface area and good heat retention so that you get a lot of browning and charring. My favorite tool to use with the wok is actually a wok spatula. It has a really long handle, so I'm able to maneuver around the wok, which can get really hot, with ease and scrape things up and really get underneath things. If you don't have access to a spatula, you can also use a wooden flat-ended spatula, anything that's going to let you lift and flip pieces over. So now I'm just going to start by preheating the wok. I'm going to be using high heat today, and I'm just going to let that heat up until it's just starting to smoke. So just like a cast iron skillet, my wok is seasoned with some oil. This keeps it slick and keeps things from sticking on. So that's what's going to start smoking and indicate to me that the wok is at the right temperature. Now I'm going to drizzle in 1 teaspoon of vegetable oil around the perimeter, just so that it coats the sides and the bottom nicely. You can swirl it around a bit. And that's starting to smoke almost immediately. So that means my oil's hot and my pan is ready. Here I'm going to add 1/2 a batch of pork and just spread that into an even layer. The reason I add a half batch is to prevent any overcrowding in the wok. And you want to be sure to move around your pork constantly. This wok spatula is really coming in handy to scrape up any bits that are sticking. So I'm just looking for a nice light brown color on the pork. This should take 2 to 3 minutes. So to deglaze the pan, I'm using some Chinese cooking wine, Shaoxing wine. You want to look for something that's slightly amber in color. This is 2 tablespoons. And I'm cooking that until it's just coating the pork and reduced. This should only take about 30 seconds. And if you can't find Shaoxing wine at your local grocery store, you can also use dry sherry as a substitute. The wine is nice and reduced. It's coating each piece of pork. And now I'm just transferring this over to a bowl. So my wok is back on the heat and moving quickly. I'm drizzling another teaspoon of oil. And essentially, I'm just going to repeat the same steps as before to cook the second half of my pork. Now that my pork is cooked, there's some residue on the bottom of my wok, so I just want to be sure to wipe that off to prevent over smoking. I have a damp paper towel. I'm just going to give that a quick wipe. Doesn't need to be super clean. We're just getting some of that residue off. On my other burner, I have 4 quarts of water coming up to a boil in a large Dutch oven. This is going to be for my noodles. The water is unseasoned because a lot of Chinese noodles already come pre-seasoned with some salt. Today, I'm using fresh lo mein, or lao mian in Mandarin. They are egg and wheat noodles, so they have a nice springy chew, and that wheat flavor really holds up to the strong flavors of the sauce and soaks it all in. If you can't find fresh lo mein, you can also use about 8 ounces of dried linguine. We find that the flat texture and its chewiness can also serve the same purpose in this dish. It only takes about 3 to 4 minutes to cook, so we don't need to start that just yet. Instead, I'm going to start by cooking off my vegetables. Notice how I have everything prepared and laid out here within arm's reach. We'll be using high heat to stir fry. This just allows me to flash cook things and keep them tender crisp without overcooking, but because we're using high heat, things are going to move really, really quickly. So I want to have everything on hand so that I'm not scrambling around later. So I'm returning back to the wok, just preheating it again on high heat. I'm seeing some wisps of smoke, so I'm just drizzling in another teaspoon of oil, just like before, coating the sides and the bottom. Almost immediately that's ready. Starting with my mushrooms, and I'm just going to cook them using my spatula to constantly move them around until they're tender and golden brown. This should take 4 to 6 minutes. Sometimes if I need a little extra help, I give it a shake, just like this. You just want to keep things constantly moving so that it doesn't stay on the bottom of the wok for too long where it can be really hot. So my mushrooms are just tender and light golden brown. So I'm just shutting off the heat and transferring to my pork. So I'm just going to flip on the heat again. When you're working on such high heat, it's important to work in stages. So removing things as they're just cooked helps everything stay tender crisp. That's really the magic word here today. Almost immediately my wok is smoking again, drizzling in another teaspoon of oil around the perimeter. And now we're going to get ready to cook our cabbage. And you can see how the slope sides are really able to hold all of that cabbage. So I can really toss things nicely and everything is touching heat. So I'm just cooking this, tossing constantly until the stems are just tender and the leaves are spotty brown. That'll take 3 to 5 minutes. If you're using dried linguine as a substitute, now is when I drop that in since it takes about 10 minutes to cook. But since we're using fresh noodles today, I can wait a little bit longer. So I'm getting some nice browning on my cabbage. It's been a little over 3 minutes. And you can see the stems are still crunchy, but just tender. So that's my cue that it's perfect. I'm just going to push the cabbage to the side. The sides of the wok have less direct heat than the bottom, so I'm really going to utilize that to keep my cabbage warm, but cook something else in the center. So to the center, I'm adding another teaspoon of oil. To that, I'm going to add my scallions, both whites and greens, as well as 2 cloves of minced garlic, and also 2 teaspoons of grated ginger. I chose to use grated ginger instead of mince just to break down any fibers and really create a smooth puree. And I'm just mashing that slightly into the bottom of the wok, drawing out all those flavors, really mixing them in with the oil. This is only going to take me 30 to 60 seconds. Things smell fragrant, and now I'm mixing everything in. These are tender crisp. I'm just gonna let that hang out for 1 second while I drop my noodles into the pot. And using my trusty chopsticks, just going to give that a stir to break up any clumps. Again, I love how nimble these are and how I can really reach in with those delicate noodles without breaking them up. So that's going to cook for 3 minutes or so. In the meantime, just tending to my cabbage. Now that those 2 ingredients are nice and incorporated, I'm ready to add back in my pork and mushroom mixture, as well as my reserved sauce. I'm going to give that a little whisk to reincorporate, and into the wok it goes. At this stage, I'm just reheating a lot of those pre-cooked ingredients, which were set aside, so they're still quite tender and crisp, as well as letting the sauce thicken up. This should take 2 minutes or so. You can see the sauce starting to get glossy. The cornstarch that I mixed in there earlier is really working its magic here, so the sauce is getting nice and thick and coating all of my ingredients. So it's been 2 minutes. My sauce is starting to thicken up. I'm shutting off the heat, and I'm just going to watch the noodles and stir out any clumps, and this should take another minute or so before I strain them out. My noodles are perfect. They are tender, but still slightly firm and chewy. So they're ready to go in the wok and combine with the sauce. And I'm just gonna heat this on medium-high. Right now the noodles are still a little bit sticky, so if you're having trouble breaking up the clumps, don't hesitate to use a pair of tongs. It just gives you a bit of a better grip. And that way I'm really able to toss things and kind of scrape the sides of the wok. And just like any other noodle, I'm incorporating it with the sauce over heat, just so that it absorbs it and kind of finishes cooking and is really flavorful throughout. My noodles are really lengthy, so I'm just lifting them up to really separate them, spread them out. So the noodles have absorbed all the sauce, none of it's pooling, and it's looking really glossy and coating each piece. So I'm just going to shut off my heat and plate it up. I can't wait to dig in. This is really calling to me. The noodles are so glossy. I can smell that smoky, savory flavor. So can't wait to make a plate for myself. But before that, I can't wait. I just need to try a piece of pork. That's so delicious. Still tender and juicy, and I'm really picking up on those sweet, smoky flavors. Tastes just like the cha cha I get from my favorite Chinese market. The keys to good stir-fried noodles are prepping the ingredients to ensure that each component cooks quickly and evenly, building an intense but balanced sauce with just enough thickener to allow it to cling, and cooking the noodles until they're almost tender so they can finish cooking in the sauce. The results are so satisfying.
Now that you know how to stir-fry lo mein noodles, you're ready to take the next step. And with ATK classes, you'll get access to a wide variety of lessons filled with masterful techniques, helpful videos, and step-by-step photos. From knife skills and making hand-rolled pasta, to baking and frosting incredible cakes, and so much more. Download the America's Test Kitchen app and start learning with ATK classes today.